Thanks. So I'm excited to give this presentation. I've given it a few times. I was able to give it at First Pitch Arizona at the end of last year. Only like my slideshow didn't actually work, so like we sort of had to talk about it all just staring at Jake Berger's rolling strikeout chart. But we'll get there. I've got like 60 something charts to go over with you guys. This is the presentation. It's called My Chart Will Roll On. I love these rolling charts, as you can tell from this little picture here. But I want to use them, especially our PLV ones, to just talk about how we analyze hitters, just, sort of in this new millennium, right? The one I like to start this with the comment of just like the only thing that's constant is change, right? Like we know that in like almost every phase of life, but sometimes it's really easy for us to get stuck when we look at stats, especially now in the offseason, as thinking that the whole year is what we see on the Fangraphs or Baseball Reference page, right? They get that end strikeout rate of 27%, and we just thought that's what they were like all year. But we kind of know that's not the case, right? A lot of what we're trying to do right now in the offseason really is create narratives, right? I mean, that's just what humans are. We want to think through why did things happen, right? And nowadays we just have boatloads of data. We have more data than we really know what to do with. So we're getting pretty good at telling stories about baseball players, but it's really easy to fall for some narrative traps, right? Our brains a lot of times want to use the most simple explanation. In many cases, that's good, but sometimes we oversimplify and we don't quite catch exactly what's happening. So I want to talk about like maybe the old way that we talked about building narratives. This is a player who played on two teams last year, more with the first team than the second team. But as you can see, the strikeout rate changes dramatically with the second team. The ISO does go down, but like better WRC plus, and really that 10% strikeout drop. So the common narrative throughout the season is, wow, this second team really fixed something. They saw something in player one, traded for him, and fixed it when he got there, right? And, the stats sort of bear that out. The thing is, when we look at this player's actual rolling charts for strikeout rate, actually, that's not exactly what we see, right? We actually see this sort of downward trend all year. And when we want to talk about when this player was actually traded, they're traded here, right? This is when the player switches teams. So did team number two find something and fix it? Or did the player already sort of fix it? And then the new team just kind of helped him stay in this new place, right? These are sort of different narratives that we can't really understand just by looking at these static, like this is what he was like with team one. This is what he was like with team two, right? This does end up being Jake Berger. And actually, if we use our PLV stats, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, we can actually dive even deeper than that. Why did these change happen, right? So we look at Jake Berger's decision value. Real quick, decision value is totally agnostic of result. It just looks at whether the player is swinging at the right pitches and taking the right pitches based on the count, based on the spin, based on the location, based on all these things that go into it and our amazing PLV stats that are pitch level data. And we can see that actually Jake Berger starts making just better decisions here in 2 strike counts. We can actually pull that out using our PLV rolling chart. So he starts to become just average at making decisions in 2 strike counts. And for a guy with his kind of power, that's a big deal, right? But we can actually go even deeper than that, right? Like, yes, it was good decision value in 2 strike counts, but it's very specifically, he starts making good decisions against breaking balls as well, right? So Jake Berger starts, about halfway through the season or so, little after, starts making really good decisions against breaking balls, right? And those are something that are really helping him sort of take his game to the next level. And even deeper than that, right? We look at breaking balls specifically in 2 strike counts. You want to know why Jake Berger got better at not striking out? Because he started swinging and taking the right breaking balls in those 2 strike counts, right? Like this is to me, a much fuller explanation maybe of what we saw. It wasn't that Miami found something and fixed it necessarily. It's very specifically breaking balls in 2 strike counts. Our metrics show that he got so much better at this. And that's a good way to understand how 10% comes off your strikeout rate, right? Like not because of the switch teams, but because of this growth in these skills. So just before I get too deep, I'm going to be talking about rolling charts a lot. How and where can you make them? I'll tell you, Fangraphs has a really good way to do that. You go to the player page, graphs tab, and just switch the time frame to by game. Fangraphs is cool. It's got a wide selection of stats. You can mess with the sample sizes. And what's really cool at Fangraphs is you can look at multiple rolling charts at the same time. So you can see how 2 things play together on like the same chart, but they don't have any StatCast data. And it does show the player's average as a reference line, but like it doesn't show you league average or anything like that. Baseball Savant, if you go to the breakdowns on the StatCast tab for a specific player. You can look at the rolling charts. Really cool because you can get those expected stats. What you can't do is get multiple stats, and the overall menu is quite limited, right? Like there's a list of maybe like 10 stats that you can get, and that's about it. And then with our PLV app, which is really what I'm going to be focusing on, we don't have standard stats. You can't just look at a player's strikeout rate in our PLV app, but we have custom sample sizes, and you can look at our skill-based metrics, like not based on results, based on what happened, like what is this player actually doing, regardless of like what those pitches turned into, because those skills really help us understand, especially with like young players or changing players, why these changes are happening, right? You can only look at one stat at a time, but we do use StatCast data to create these stats. So really interesting there. Those are the three places I really go to make rolling charts because I'm not that good at Excel and I can't really do it on my own. So I did want to share that really quick for folks. If you start getting excited, this is where you can start doing that. Real quick, this is what Fangraphs looks like. Tons of stats, no StatCast. I've got Yandy Diaz here. We're looking at his ground ball rate and his WOBA, and you'll notice they kind of move really in sync with each other, right? When he's hitting more fly balls, his WOBA's better, right? And when he hits fewer fly balls, his WOBA gets worse. This is something we know about Yandy Diaz because he's got those giant biceps, but hits a lot of stuff in the ground. When he's able to get the ball in the air, things get better. We also saw that fly ball rate last season start really high, get really, really low. He starts climbing back up to something closer to his average, but this is one of the reasons why I'm a little skeptical to project him for 20 home runs next year, because we need him to hit something like 35 to 40% fly balls. That's just not something he's shown he can do for an extended time over the last several years. StatCast, this is what their rolling charts look like. I'm using Alejandro Kirk as an example of sometimes you run into a player who does something amazing for one short period of time and then goes back to being the player they sort of always have been. Alejandro Kirk, a good example of that. He had that huge power spurt in the first half of 2022. He never really goes back. So it's really hard, if you're going into the season, hey, maybe Alejandro Kirk finds some power again. That's kind of hard to imagine because he's sort of showing us the type of player he is over a very long sample and has never really gone back to showing us what he did in early 2022. So finally, we've got our PLV ones. I want to spend just a little bit of time going back through what our skill-based metrics are. So we're going to look at different charts that have all of these, but swing aggression, that it's a little different than just overall swing rate, because what we're actually trying to show you is, were they more likely than a normal player to swing at that specific pitch? Not just are they swinging a lot of pitches, because when you just use swing rate, you lose a bit of context. Like, what if they're not getting very many pitches to swing at that are good, right? So they're becoming really patient because they're not seeing hittable pitches. So those kinds of things. So we like to look at swing aggression. We've got strike zone judgment. It's a little different from decision value. This is just about, are you swinging at strikes and taking balls, right? The difference with decision value, which you see after that, is more about, one, it measures a different thing. It's looking at runs added as opposed to just like how often they swung at strikes and took pitches that weren't in the zone. The decision value is also going to say like, hey, some strikes in certain counts you shouldn't swing at, right? Like low, like painted on the corner and a 1-0 count, let that go, right? Because you can't do anything with it, even though it's in the zone. And even though it's technically not good strike zone judgment, it is a good decision because you can't do anything with that pitch and you have more pitches you can take in that specific count. So decision model gives you that, decision value gives you that level of depth using our model. Pitch hittability, that's just the likelihood of a specific pitch that you see becoming a batted ball across Major League Baseball. Contactability, that's more than just contact percent. Contact percent is how often did you hit the ball when you swung at it. Ours is how often did you hit the ball when you swung at it above the expectation. Certain pitches are really, really hard to hit, so the expectation is very low. So if a player can get their bat to that ball, we want to give them some credit for that, right? So that's what contactability is doing. Power is based on the pitch you got. Did you hit it harder than we expect, right? So that meatball middle, we expect you to hit that pretty hard. Did you, right? Those are the kinds of things we're measuring. And finally, there's hitter performance, which is just sort of a way to, is this player adding value based on the pitches that they're seeing and the swing take decisions and all that stuff. So I know I blitzed through that pretty fast, but we're going to talk about them more as we go. The last thing I want to say before we really dive into the charts is that these rolling charts aren't predictive. They're just incredibly descriptive, right? Because these charts are only showing us what has happened in the past. We can make some assumptions about what a player looks like if they continue on these trends. But I can't just sit here and say these are predictive, because they're rolling charts. They go up and down all the time, and they won't necessarily tell you when that's going to happen. Right. So the first thing I want to do is sort of go through some of those stats I just talked about and use some examples just to sort of better explain what these rolling charts are showing us. So I'm starting with pitch hitability. It's a very interesting one. We actually just added it fairly recently. Kyle Bland snuck that in there for us. And it was about trying to understand how often are players getting pitches that they could actually turn into a batted ball. I've got two players here that sort of show us the extremes, right? Javi Baez. If you've watched Javi Baez at any point in maybe the last decade, you know that there's not really any good reason for a pitcher to throw him a strike. And that's actually what our pitch ability metric shows us. They don't throw him, they don't throw him balls that are easy to get his bat on, right? So we can talk about, Javi Baez, changing this and that about his swing, but like, unless he makes pitchers throw him pitches that could actually become a batted ball, it's really hard to see him becoming anything more than sort of what we've seen the last year or two. Miles Straw, on the other hand, a guy who can slap the ball around, no doubt, but you also know he's not going to do any damage, right? Like, you're not worried about Miles Straw ripping a double off you or anything like that. So what do pitchers do? They just attack him. They give him pitches they know he can hit because they're not afraid of him hitting it. So pitch hitability, really kind of cool like that, to see how pitchers are attacking these players. And actually, I'm going to use Spencer Steer as an even deeper example of how this pitch hitability and contact ability can kind of play together, and talk about why sometimes we see players change. You'll remember last season, Spencer Steer sort of finishes a little weaker than he starts. And when I dug into it, what I actually saw was the two on the left with breaking balls. He's actually really good at hitting breaking balls compared to regular players in terms of just making contact with it. And it looks like pitchers throughout the season started figuring that out and stopped giving him breaking balls that he could actually do something with. They got them further away from the zone. They made them very difficult to hit because they realized he was very good at it, right? And on the other hand, they saw with fastballs, he's actually not very good at making contact with fastballs compared to league average. So what they do, they started out throwing him a bunch of hittable fastballs, and they just kept doing it because they were like, hey, these are the pitches that Spencer Steer isn't as good at making contact with. So these kinds of things help us understand, like, hey, why did Spencer Steer maybe have a little bit harder time? It's because one of his bread and butter was actually hitting breaking balls, and pitchers started throwing him better ones, right? So this is the kind of cool stuff that we can dig into with these charts. We're just getting started. I've got so many more of these to go through. I apologize if I'm talking fast. I'm going to try to slow down just a little bit, but let's get to contact ability and decision value. So we know Luis Arias, for example, is an amazing hitter in terms of he always going to have a high batting average. He doesn't strike out much, but actually our model suggests that he actually doesn't make good decisions compared to normal players. And the chart on the left explains why. Luis Arias doesn't need to make conventional decisions to hit 350, right? Because his contact ability is absolutely amazing. He's 10% more likely to make contact with the ball than another player when he swings. And he's like that really all the time. Like, he never is actually worse than like the 95th percentile in the league at being able to make contact when he swings. So that's why a player like this doesn't need decision value, right? And this is really to kind of call out that players don't have to be good at everything to be good, right? Luis Arias does not need to make good decisions because he has a skill, this contact ability, that allows him to make decisions other players shouldn't make, right? He's like, oh, this ball's, 6 inches outside the zone. That's fine. I still feel like I can punch that over the third baseman's head or something. So yeah, I'll just do that, or, over the first baseman or whatever. He doesn't need to make good decisions like a normal player does because he's going to hit the ball anyway. So this is a good example of a player can be good and have a big quote unquote flaw like this. Like decision value. And that's because he has a skill that really makes it so he doesn't need to make good decisions. I also want to talk about some of the things that we see with what I call the classic slugger. This is Matt Wallner. I've been looking into him a bit. I know he's getting some praise right now for the position he's going into. And I'll tell you, his power and decision-making are fantastic. Matt Wallner, you knew he was strong. We saw that, technically it goes down, but like it's still like in the 90th percentile. Matt Wallner adds extra bases when he makes contact, period. That's something you want to see from a guy who you expect to hit home runs. And his decision value started good and got even better. So that's really exciting to see with Matt Wallner. He knows when to take pitches. He knows what stuff he should probably swing at. And the reason for that is because if you look at that one on the far right, that's his contact ability. It's not good, right? So you might think like, oh man, if he can't make more contact, like we could have some problems. And that's actually not necessarily the case. We see this kind of trope all the time, right? Because Matt Wallner is good at picking his spots. He doesn't need great contact ability. Sure, it will hamper his ability to have a great batting average at all times, but because he knows when to swing and when not to swing, he can really maximize that power without needing perfect contact ability. Right. So we don't mind the weak contact ability quite as much because we know he's only going to swing at the right stuff that is still very likely to be hit. And when he hits it, he's going to hit it a long, long way. So again, we see a weakness here and it means something, but it's certainly not doom and gloom because the two things I really want to see is, does he make good decisions and hit for a bunch of power? You'll actually find, I don't want to just compare him to Aaron Judge, but Aaron Judge has this similar sort of thing when you go into the rolling charts. His contact ability is not great because of what he's trying to do when he swings. And because of that, at least we see it in the power, right? We know that when he swings at the right time. And when he swings, he's trying to send the ball, 800 feet. It looks like Matt Wallner can possibly do that, even though he swings and misses sometimes because of that sort of want to hit it a million miles per hour sort of mentality. So this is one of the things we can see when we look at these skills sort of across the board. And I really like doing this just to get an idea of what a hitter really is and how they're, there's a lot of ways to succeed in Major League Baseball, and I kind of want to see how some of these guys are trying to do it. Matt Wallner, a really good example of how a lot of sluggers try to make it work, and it looks like he can do that. So I think he can be a really nice power asset, even if the, batting average might be a little low. You probably don't care because that's not why you're drafting a guy like Matt Wallner. I also want to talk about young players. These charts are so cool with young players. And I want to talk about learning patience, right? So Elly De La Cruz, I've talked about him a lot, but Elly De La Cruz really sees this big spike in his decision value later on in the season. And if you look at the chart on the right, what you'll see is he really starts laying off pitches a bit better in 2-strike counts, right? Now, we didn't see results from this come out right away. Elly De La Cruz hits a lot of ground balls. That's something that decision value and swing aggression aren't necessarily showing us, although there are times that they can give us clues. With this, what we're seeing is if you want to know if Elly De La Cruz can potentially become better in terms of strikeouts and hitting the right pitches, I think the answer is yes. He's showing us that he can do this. He's showing us that he is learning. Now, again, these aren't predictive. This doesn't mean because he ended last season as a 75th percentile decision maker that Elly De La Cruz is going to remain that. But it does tell us he has shown us this potential, and it's exactly what we wanted to see from him because we know he can hit the ball hard. Actually, I'm not showing it here, but his contact ability would surprise you. Even though he had a high strikeout rate, he was really good at making contact when he swung. The problem was, if you look sort of at the first halves of these charts, is that he swung a lot of times when he shouldn't have. He was very, very aggressive. So even though he made contact with some of these pitches, he couldn't do anything with them because, if you watched him, he would swing at stuff that was, like several inches below the zone. You're not going to do anything with that pitch. You're probably just going to roll it to somebody. But the fact he even made contact with it tells me that his problem isn't necessarily just swing and miss. It's swinging at things maybe he shouldn't and getting himself into a lot of bad counts by, he's fighting off pitches because our contact percent or our contact ability does factor in foul balls, and he's getting himself into bad counts. And when he gets in those bad counts, he was very, very aggressive. He gets better with it though. So I'm really excited about Elly De La Cruz because if we can see this sort of trend early in next season, I think we could really see him take off. We actually saw a very similar thing with O'Neal Cruz. I didn't have a lot of 2023 data to add on here, but we saw the same thing with O'Neal Cruz, and he actually did start to carry it into last season, but then he got hurt, so we didn't get to see how that played out for O'Neal Cruz. But Elly De La Cruz making better decisions, getting more patient in those 2-strike counts, taking balls. I think he's going to force pitchers to throw him more strikes in those 2-strike counts, and that can help him reduce that strikeout rate as well. Now we're just going to kind of go through players without talking about like sort of general motive. I just wanted to look at a bunch of players who I found were very, very interesting. I've got a whole bunch of these, but I want to start with Christopher Morel. What you're seeing on the left is contact ability. That shouldn't surprise you. The reason Christopher Morel strikes out in most cases is because he's just not that good at making contact when he swings. He has a lot of swing and miss in his game. The problem with Christopher Morel is that this decision value stuff is really erratic, right? It does overall trend down, which is not what I want to see. If you have poor contact ability and poor decision making, it's almost impossible to succeed, right? Even if you've got all this power, if you're swinging at the wrong stuff and aren't that good at making contact when you swing, your power kind of doesn't matter. And what we need to see from Christopher Morel is some consistent decision making. He doesn't need to be 90th percentile either, right? He's got enough power and I think ability to be a good fantasy contributor as long as he's somewhere close to average. He can't be this 25th percentile stuff. We saw those flashes of him making good decisions. These really sort of align with when we saw Christopher Morel at his best, and then it would kind of fall off the table again. I don't really have a good explanation as to why this happens, but if he finds any sort of consistency just a little bit higher up than this, I think Christopher Morel can be the player a lot of people want him to be in 2024. But if he remains this erratic, it's going to be really hard for him to be any sort of consistent contributor. Josh Lowe. So Josh Lowe, of course, he starts hot and then he has a great, then he sort of is very cold for a while, gets much better towards the end of the season. Wanted to understand why. Number one, we see that he gets a lot better at making contact. And very specifically, we start to realize he gets much better at making contact against left-handed pitching. Now, I don't necessarily expect Josh Lowe to be a 90th percentile contact guy against left-handed pitching, but he sure as heck doesn't have to be below the 10th percentile, which is where he started the season. And if he can keep this number up above average, especially this contact ability versus left-handed pitchers, then maybe the Rays actually let him play every day. I think the path to being the everyday guy who never sits, even with Tampa, is showing right here at the end of this chart where he's making above average decisions and he's making above average contact against lefties. I love seeing this because it gives me that path to how does Josh Lowe, a guy like Josh Lowe, who's easy conceptually to platoon, how does he avoid that? Well, it's right here on the chart. It's something he's already done, right? Again, that doesn't mean you'll do it again. If you remember, that graph I showed on Alejandro Kirk, but he did show me he can do it. And he did do it right, at the end of the season for more than just a moment. So excited about Josh Lowe next year, especially if he can keep this anywhere above average. Doesn't have to be 75th percentile even, just above average because of his power and speed. Vinny Pasquantino. So this was really a tale of two seasons for me. I want to be more excited about Vinny P than I am right now. One thing about Vinny P, he's got that sort of probably cap on home runs between 20 and 25. He's not like a big slugger like a Torkelson or a Casas in terms of young first baseman. But what we saw in his first season was just this upward trend in decision value, getting better and better. He's a guy that we knew was going to have good plate discipline numbers, and he showed it with that decision value. He comes into the following season, and we just see that completely fall off. And that just because the decision value goes down doesn't mean the strikeouts go up, but it does in most cases mean you're going to see a lot more weak contact. You're going to see a guy who's swinging at pitches he shouldn't have swung at. And because of that, he's making just bad contact overall. And for a guy like Pasquantino, who doesn't have a ton of power to begin with, the way for him to unlock being that, high level first baseman we want Vinny P to be is the guy on the left, right? Not the guy on the right. I'm not going to sit here and try to explain exactly why this decision value falls down. I just will tell you that it did it hard, and then he got hurt. So that's where, for me, there's some extra risk there, because if Vinny Pasquantino goes back to being a below average decision maker, I really start to wonder what his upside can possibly look like. Whereas the good decision making Vinny Pasquantino can not only have good plate discipline numbers, but can maximize his power because he's choosing the right pitches to swing at. So that's kind of where I'm at on Vinny P. Michael Harris II. So this one, he obviously, he was really rough to start last season. I didn't really understand why, but what I can tell you is this: in 2022, he was mostly an above average decision maker. He had one sort of dip. He brings it back up. And in 2023, we actually see sort of it becoming a little bit more consistent, where he starts out having some contact problems. I don't know if something was off in his swing. I don't know if something was off with his body, but at some point, fairly early on, he jumps right back up. And what I love seeing is, even though these charts always go up and down, I love seeing tight bands, right? Especially from a guy like Michael Harris II in, really for the 2/3 of the season, even longer. he shows us that like he is consistently a 75th percentile or better contact maker. And with his approach and his speed, that's exactly what we need him to be. His decision making isn't great, but it's because he can make such good contact that he's just trying to put the ball in play. What we also saw was a nice little spike in power at the end of the season. Not sure how much I buy that long term, but it was cool to see him get some more power later on. You may remember it if you had him on fantasy teams. We did see some spikes in power later on. He's probably more of an average power guy long term, but this might be the sign of something greater. So if you're trying to think, is there room for growth with Michael Harris? There is, right? Get rid of those first 300 swings of bad contact ability and maybe a little bump in power. So if you're trying to think of upside for him, I think you can find it. And it is in these charts, even if you're not necessarily projecting it. Zach Gelof. So he's a guy that I've had a hard time really getting a feel for. He's got that, it's been written up. It was written up well at Fangraphs. He's got this weird softball swing. And he's actually really not that good at making contact when he swings. He does miss a lot more than we would expect players based on the pitches he saw, but it worked for a while because he had that great decision value. He falls off. So he falls off a bit at the end of the year, but not in the way you'd think. So Zach Gelof didn't actually start striking out more at the end of the season. You see that big dip that happens after about pitch 1,000, falls way down. And this gives you, those last 200 or so pitches. That's basically his month of September. And when I looked into the actual, I went on Fangraphs, I was like, what changes for him towards the end of the season? His ground ball rate spikes. Zach Gelof towards the end, he was like a 38 to 40% ground ball guy for the last part of the season. He becomes like a 50% ground ball guy. And it's because he was swinging at pitches he shouldn't have. That's really where it comes in. So when you try to think, why does Gelof start hitting more ground balls? It's right here in the decision value, right? He wasn't that good at making contact in the first place. He then starts swinging at stuff he really shouldn't. And it didn't turn into strikeouts, which is good, but it did turn into ground balls, which is obviously not ideal. Zach Gelof did show us, though, he can be an average to above average decision maker. I think if he gets back there, he can go back to hitting a lot of line drives because of that swing he has. But if the decision value stays down, then I would start expecting pretty rough stuff in terms of ground ball rate. But it is kind of cool that I was able to be like, why ground balls? Oh, decision value. Decision value, not just strikeouts. It can also talk about weak contact like ground balls. We've got Nolan Jones. So Nolan Jones was a cool example of me trying to figure out why. I looked at his decision value chart. I'm like, what the heck happened? And what was really weird is I put his breaking ball 2-strike thing right in the middle because it was interesting to see that it almost exactly correlates with what we see for his overall decision making. And then also when you look at the fastballs, which are on the right, like Nolan Jones actually doesn't, he has a downward tip, but he doesn't actually suffer that much against fastballs in terms of decision making. It was all about breaking balls, and really it was about breaking balls in 2-strike counts. And it looks like he finds a way to fix that. I'm not sure exactly what was happening. For some reason, he was really struggling against these breaking balls and 2-strike counts, but he didn't start out that way and he doesn't finish that way. So I like seeing him bounce way back up. Hopefully he doesn't have any more dips like this again. But in terms of diagnosing maybe why he starts making bad decision value, I can start breaking down 2-strike counts, breaking balls. Oh man, like this is where the problem was, but that's okay, because he does fix it. And it's not like the problem was more widespread. When I see players with a very, very specific problem, it makes me feel a little better because I know that in my personal life, if I have a very specific problem, I have a chance of fixing it. But if I have a very general problem, it's very difficult. And this really goes true with athletes as well. When you got a lot of things to fix, it's really hard to do. But when you just have a very specific thing, it allows you to focus on that one thing. It looks like he was able to do that. So Nolan Jones, I think he's a very exciting player for next year. I'm not sure I'm as excited as everyone else, but it's not because of his decision value, because that actually ended up being pretty good. Oh, Royce Lewis. Why is everyone excited about Royce Lewis? Look, we know the downside with Royce Lewis. The downside is his health. He may not play that much, but when he plays, he started off, not so great, but the more he played at the major league level, the more he figured it out. And it was across the board. Decision value, power, and contact ability all get better as the season goes on. I think, there's a lot of potential in Royce Lewis. That's why he was on these prospect lists for so long, despite this long injury history. Really excited to see it. I hope injuries don't continue to derail him, because man, when he gets that time and gets to play, gets to be healthy for a little while, he figures this major league stuff out. So I am very excited. Obviously, risk assessment in terms of injury is something you really have to think about in terms of where you draft him. But he will be on all of my boards unless somehow I draft like 2 huge injury risks like right in front of him. But yeah, Royce Lewis, that, really exciting stuff across the board. It's not often I see all 3 things go up as a player goes on. And I saw that with Royce Lewis and felt like I had to call that out. Bobby Witt Jr., this was a cool one. So what you're seeing is 2022 versus 2023. Like, how does Bobby Witt Jr. unlock more? By becoming a better decision maker, right? So in 2022, don't let just like the lines and stuff fool you. Also look at what the runs added, or like look at this y-axis. He spends almost the entire season in 2022 below adding 1 run per 100 pitches in terms of decision value. That's where this line is. And we can see that actually Bobby Witt rarely dips below that, especially after the first 1,000 pitches or so. At the end of the season, he gets even better. I think Bobby Witt is, decision value is cool because it's entirely mental. It's the decision to swing or not swing, right? Not whether or not you made contact, that requires ability. Not how hard you hit it, that requires ability. Decision value technically doesn't require any physical ability. And so it's a very mental thing. And it's the thing that players really can grow with, even more so than the other metrics. So seeing Bobby Witt really keep this on an upward trend. Again, Bobby Witt has the type of skill set where if he's even an average decision maker, this continues to be a very elite player. He actually showed us he can be very, very good as a below average decision maker. And he can be absolutely, top 5 pick guy when he's, just an average decision maker. So if he becomes even better than that, my God, he might even, he might be the type of guy that we're talking about at pick 2. I think you already could do that. I feel like a lot of people do that, but to really solidify that behind Ronald Acuna, because I'm not sure he can get quite to that place. It's looking as a average to above average decision maker. I'd love to see that growth in 2024. I wanted to talk about Adley Rutschman and why, I love this guy. The power is a little bit up and down, but good Lord, like this dude, contact ability, when he swings, he hits it. I love that about him. He was like this in 2023 or 2022 as well. So Adley Rutschman, I think the reason his floor is so high is because he's going to put a lot of balls in play. He's going to do it near the top of an order that's getting a lot better. And I think the power is still going to keep growing, but because he's already got that contact ability, I think it keeps his floor really, really high. That's why he's my top catcher and probably is for a lot of other folks too. Vlad Guerrero Jr. is one I've been trying to look into, and I wanted to look year over year power. And so I know that these charts aren't exactly lined up, and it's because I wanted to try to put the MLB, the average line is a good reference point across all 3 straight across. So we know in 2021, this dude was elite. He was above the 90th percentile overall in power. He did dip 1 time, but it only touched average. Then he goes right back up to being amazing. And in 2022, he never really comes that close to being a 90th percentile power guy and sort of lives in this average to 75th percentile. And in 2023, he starts out, again, kind of strong and then dips down even further. The reason I talk about this is because I want Vlad to go back to being a 35, 40 home run guy. But man, again, we're getting further and further out from when that happened. And the power metric we've got tells us that, he hasn't really shown any sign of being quite that level of power. Can he hit, I'm probably still projecting him for close to 30 home runs because I think he can be better than he was. I think he can at least go back to, maybe what he was in 2022. But this was a bit discouraging for me. Thankfully, he's got, unreal bat skills, Vlad Guerrero Jr. So, I'm not saying I'm totally out on him. It's just, it was not encouraging to see that he has not gone back to looking anything like that 2021 guy, at least based on our metrics. Spencer Torkelson. Obviously I'm a Tigers guy, big fan. In his first season, I liked that it was going up, right? But it kind of ended it, just sort of an average power guy. And it was going to be hard for Spencer Torkelson to be better than that. Of course, in 2023, he really, really takes off. He hits 27 home runs, I think, after June 4th or something like that. You had, from June 4th to the end of the season, he had a 40 home run pace over 162 games. Absolutely fantastic power. And that's what we needed Torkelson to unlock. His contact ability is fine. His decision-making is fine. His fly ball approach will limit his batting average quite a bit, but the power is very real. And I do think there's a 40 home run season in his future, especially if he shows us a little more stuff like this. It's something that he can do. It's something he can sustain. There's a lot of power here. And I just liked seeing the year-to-year sort of growth where he just continues to move on that upward trend. you'll notice at the end of 2022, he sort of ends at this just above 0 mark in terms of expected extra bases added. What was cool is that that's really where he starts in 2023 and then just keeps going up and up and up. So that, I mean, that was also just very cool to see that growth continued on. And I'm hoping, I don't know if I don't know if there's a lot of growth up from here, but I do think there's a chance that we can see him very consistently be in this range of like 75th, 90th percentile or even better. And that's why I see that path to 40 home runs, especially with that fly ball rate. Matt McLain, another guy that was a little bit hard to put my finger on throughout the season. He was, especially at the start, he was hot, but he wasn't doing it the same way he did in the minors. He was hitting a lot of line drives. His decision value was kind of erratic. It was up and down. It sort of ends down. His contact ability was never good. And then it becomes really, really bad. This is not like, and what I want to say from this is sometimes I look at these charts and don't get a conclusion. I make it sound like the charts always have an answer. Sometimes they don't, because I'm still, I have a pretty rosy projection on Matt McLain based on what these charts are trying to show me, but it does tell me like, look, maybe there's a little more risk in this profile than I thought, because our skill metrics really don't like what he was doing. And it's going to be hard, of course, to succeed with a low decision value and a low contact ability, but I do think he can get that decision value back up. And that's what it's really going to take for him to meet or exceed the expectations we have for him. But overall, this didn't tell me what I was hoping it would tell me. Not just because, I want everyone to be getting better, but also because it didn't give me a lot of definitive answers besides things got a little rough at the end of the season. And I'm not quite sure why. Another player that I really wanted to talk about is actually JJ Bleday. Again, this is not someone I'm targeting in 12-team leagues or even probably 15-team leagues, but it was really interesting to see how much he grew. JJ Bleday starts making really, really good decisions. I mean, he starts out being a good decision maker, gets even better as the season goes on, and we really see the power take off. I mean, he was showing us no power, a lot of ground balls, stuff like that in the beginning of the season, and he really takes a spike, really in the second half of the year. So I'm interested to see if JJ Bleday can get, he's going to have opportunities in Oakland. I'm wondering if he can become something a little more than a also ran with the A's. The thing that holds him back, of course, that contact ability. I know I talked about Matt Wallner having sort of this similar, like lots of power, good decision making. So I didn't care about contact ability, but it does hold you back a bit. And unlike Wallner, JJ Bleday hasn't necessarily shown me that he can consistently be like a 90th percentile power guy. I'm not sure that's in his wheelhouse at all. So when I look at this, I think, man, there is a path upward, but I can't get too excited. This contact ability isn't good to become I think, guy that we care about in 12-team and 15-team leagues. He's going to need to keep that power above average and keep making good decisions and maybe leave Oakland, because that is just a wasteland out there. But it was, I love looking at these for young players because they give me not just a sense of what they are, but maybe what they could become. And with JJ Bleday, maybe there's a little more than we've expected so far based on his not so good 2023. Another player I absolutely love, even though he's been erratic in some ways for sure. That's Christian Encarnacion Strand. His decision value in 2-strike counts in general, really up and down. It was nice to see it go up towards the end of the season, but man, it was erratic. His decision-making against fastballs, which you would think for a power hitter would just be his bread and butter. And he was all over the place in terms of decision value, but we did see the power by the end of the season really take a spike. Actually, this ends up going a bit above where it's hard to tell because we sort of rescale these for each chart to make them easier to digest on their own. He actually shows more power at the end of the season than even like Spencer Torkelson did in this range way up here. So I think this is another guy who has that, 35, 40 home run potential, but as a young player, this erratic decision-making is very much par for the course. And it's something he'll have to fix if he wants to, one, earn an everyday spot in that very crowded infield in Cincinnati. And two, if he wants to have any kind of consistency and really be able to find the pitches he needs to target to get up in the air and out of Great American Ballpark. So the erratic stuff, little scary and really indicative of a young player who's still trying to figure out how pitchers are attacking him. So I'm excited about Christian Encarnacion Strand because of that big power upside, which, I mean, you didn't need a chart to tell you that he could hit the ball really hard, but I really like that he unlocked that at the major league level. And it may have been in some part due to some spikes in decision value, but yeah, just overall really erratic. So expecting consistency from the start would not be something I would recommend. uh, I've talked really fast and gone through this quick, but that's okay because I wanted to have a little bit of interaction if possible. But it's really important just to remember, like, this is a quote from an old philosopher, but some things are only what they are because they constantly change. These players are adapting and growing and changing all the time throughout the season. Don't think that just because you see a number on a player that's like, oh, 30% strikeout rate, that's what he is, right? That's actually not the case. Like, there's a very good chance that, what if it was front loaded, right? Like Jake Berger's season long strikeout rate number isn't what I'm so interested right now, right? I'm actually really interested in what he showed in that second half because it was a consistent downward trend. It wasn't like random variance, right? Because, endpoints can always be pretty arbitrary, but we did see on those skill metrics that he was actually trying to do something and it worked and it had a real impact on his strikeout rate. So that's really, I'm not saying I think he's a 21% strikeout rate guy, Jake Berger, but it's a really good example of players can change. They're not just what that stat was for the full season. And if you only look at that full season number, especially for players who don't have a long track record and things like that, young players, players who we know are trying to change or who showed us something in the second half, maybe if you're only looking at that season long number, then you're just always going to be left behind. You're always going to be just because you're not going to understand how that number came to be, right? Like, yes, and in some sense, like it's good to know what that final number is, especially for veterans who consistently get back to the same numbers, like a Kyle Schwarber, something like that. But if you want to understand how players are changing, why they're changing, you do it by looking at these rolling charts. Again, I'm showing you PLV ones. Get on Fangraphs, get on StatCast, get on Baseball Savant, look at the StatCast stuff, whatever it is that's easiest for you, that really rings true with you. And that's when you'll really start to get an understanding of how players are changing, how they're developing, how they are sort of becoming the player that maybe we want them to be, or becoming the player, of course, that we don't want them to be. So I'm going to open up my browser here because I was hoping I'd be able to see the chat in the comments, but I wanted to know if there was any players that people wanted to look at or have me just sort of do live here and say, hey, this is, tell me about this player. I'm curious. And I want to look at this stuff live. So I don't know if anyone has anything. I can see the chat now. Oh, okay, cool. Let's start. So Lars Nootbaar. I think I just have to change what I'm presenting here. I'm going to stop it for just a second. I'm going to present my entire screen. I want the entire screen over here. So let's do it. I'm going to, as you're asking me, I'm going to use the hitter charts. Ta-da! And so let's look at Lars Nootbaar. This was a guy I was really excited about last year. So I haven't not dug quite as deep as I had hoped going into this season about Lars Nootbaar. He is someone who previously had really good decision making, and yeah, he's still there on that. It's cool to see. Something I don't always talk about is how I manipulate these charts to come. If you watch, you notice I didn't always have the same like rolling. Sometimes it was rolling 100. Sometimes it was rolling 400. One of the reasons that I do that is because sometimes I just don't have the right sample size base for the data set that I have. So this one's fine, 400. I usually don't go that much above this for decision value, but I want to, I really don't want a sample that's much bigger than about a third of what the overall sample is. Because if I did like a 1,000, just to make up a number, if I did what is his rolling 1,500 pitch decision value, like it's just going to basically be a flat line because he only had 500 more pitches to change that. So it's good. It's going to be so heavily weighted by the first 1,500 that I'm not going to get a lot of new data. So I try to make it about a third. Of course, I can't always do that because the overall sample is still too small or it doesn't quite work out, but about a third as a minimum. And then otherwise, I like our defaults that Kyle Bland has put in here. So these are pretty cool though. Lars Nootbaar, good decision maker. He had a real big spike in power in 2022. I'm wondering if any of that stuck around. Average. Okay. Average power for Lars Nootbaar. This might be a little bit, this is probably a little bit sticky. I'm not sure he has like huge power. And then let's also look at, I really start with 3 all the time to just get a sense. And that's decision making power and contact ability in any particular order. Okay, this is cool. So Lars Nootbaar is a good decision maker and has good contact ability. I'm not sure if the Cardinals are going to let him become the everyday, leadoff guy, but I think he has that kind of skill set and potential. So I'd love to see that happen. Although I think Brendan Donovan will kind of be in his way to do that. But that one, a really cool one there. Kerry Carpenter. I've looked at this once before, but he is an interesting player because he should have a chance to, play a full season, hit 30 home runs kind of thing. His contact ability, sort of up and down, it looks like with Kerry Carpenter last season. Nothing too special there. I'm not sure I expected him to have better than that. How's his decision value? A power guy like this really often needs to have good decision value. And that's, I think, where we've got our problem with Kerry Carpenter is that he just doesn't make great decisions. Now, I want to see if those are limited to specific things, right? So does he have is it, decision value against breaking balls? Is that where a lot of this is coming from? Oh, well, they're certainly not helping. This sample's still a little big. So, it looks like we've got let's do 200 just to see like if there's another trend in there we can pull out. Not really. He's sort of below average at all times on that. I wonder what he was like against fastballs. My gut says he was good against them, but I don't remember. Oh, nope. Not that either. So his decision value problem is sort of across the board. The last thing I'll check just on decision value to tell you how I sort of dig in a little deeper is swing aggression really aligns with decision value a lot because most of the time being aggressive is a bad idea. And there it is, right? So Kerry Carpenter, really aggressive against fastballs. I'm probably going to see the same thing against breaking balls, but you never know. Kerry Carpenter was, aggressive against breaking balls too. So a path forward for Kerry Carpenter probably has to look like more patience, right? I think that's how he really unlocks it. I'm not sure he will or that he can, but I think that's what helps Kerry Carpenter get more power because, that's the type of hitter he is. And to be that, you often, like Matt Wallner, like a lot of other guys, that's the mold he should really be trying to emulate. And he's just not doing that very well. So let's see. Oh, Sean Murphy. That's an interesting one. I still don't quite understand why they just stopped letting Sean Murphy be a everyday catcher. He had been so good and then he just stops. This will start with swing aggression. Okay. No, nothing really interesting there. Let's see if there is something in the decision value of Sean Murphy. You'd think catchers would be good at this. Oh, wow. What's interesting is that this decision value goes way up when he's not really playing his best, right? And he's not really being the kind of guy that we want to see. So, or actually that's when the results weren't there. The decision-making is. So I'm wondering if something else falls off the table. Is it contact ability? No, that actually gets better towards the end of the season. Again, sort of counterintuitive to what the results actually showed us. That might just mean that I have to dig in deeper to find even more. I'll look at power really quick just to see. Okay. So we started out the season really well and he's kind of good all the time. But maybe that, maybe it's less about it was the real Sean Murphy was the first half versus the second half and more like there was some extra power going on and maybe we should expect, maybe not quite the second half. Cause again, he was super weird, but that was something that, at least the power was still there. It doesn't fall off the table. Yeah, it's a downward trend, but it's really important to remember, when it goes down, where does it stop? And it stops at MLB average. I'll take that. I'll take that any day. So that one's cool. Okay. Gunnar Henderson. I wish I had gotten a really good answer from Sean Murphy, but I have to admit, these charts can't always tell me exactly what's going on, right? They can't always tell me about an injury. They can't always tell me all those kinds of things. So they're a great starting point though, to see if it was a skill problem. And that's really important information to have. So, and it tells me whether things were trending the right way. All right, let's look at Gunnar Henderson. Yeah, the power was good. I knew that. I think the specific question was his swing aggression. And yeah, look at that. That's an interesting chart for us. The swing aggression with Gunnar Henderson really takes off by the end of the season. And again, this isn't just swing rate, right? It is likely his swing rate overall went up as well. But Gunnar Henderson's aggression means swinging above expected. He starts out really patient, ends up considerably more aggressive. And I wonder if we see that across like sort of the board. I know last time I showed pitch type, if you're able to access these, we've got 2-strike. So does this carry over to 2-strike counts? Yes, but not quite as extreme. So that's a little interesting. So Kyle Bland in the chat says he said after the season he was really trying to be more aggressive. He did it. Gunnar Henderson did it. That's something that is also sort of interesting to see if players actually do what they tell us they're trying to do. And it might not show up in swing rate because pitchers might not throw him stuff he can hit. I wanted to see if, definitely came across with breaking balls just to see if he was truly aggressive across the board. I'll look at fastballs and there it is. Gunnar Henderson did not tell a lie. He became more aggressive across the board pretty much in all counts. Let's see, hitter friendly counts are sort of an interesting thing sometimes. Did not get many pitches in that sort of range. So let's just see. He was also aggressive when he was ahead. Not as much. So this is fastballs specifically, but maybe overall we see the bigger spike. Yeah, I mean, it's there, but it's definitely a different shape, which is kind of interesting that he wanted to be more aggressive. He especially does it when he falls behind instead of when he's ahead. But there's actually, that doesn't necessarily mean that's bad, right? Like that is something that he could, that could be a way, I don't want to strike out. I want to get my bat on the ball. So he becomes more aggressive when he gets behind, whereas earlier on, he is still trying to pick his spots. Could be one explanation. Again, this is all about narrative building. So let's look real quick at Josh Naylor. So someone brought up Josh Naylor. Oh, that's right. It kept all this stuff. So but I want to start with swing aggression. I want to start with decision value. So Josh Naylor, he does get a spike towards the end of the season, which is interesting because he misses some time here. He comes back and we see like a bump in decision value. So that's kind of cool. I wonder what that's about, but it's a really low decision value with Josh Naylor, which is weird because he doesn't strike out a lot. Likely because of this. So whenever you see bad decision value, but a guy who doesn't strike out a lot, you're probably going to see this. You're going to see a really, really good contact ability. Again, our decision value metric does not like it when you swing at pitches that are out of the zone most of the time, even if you can, but it doesn't say like, well, except for Luis Arias, because he can hit them, right? Because it's trying to compare you to the average or the expected. And so knowing Josh Naylor really good at making contact, it could though. So Josh Naylor's always had a ground ball problem. And this could be a pretty good explanation of that. It's because he knows he can get his bat on a lot of balls, right? He can hit almost, lots of stuff that other players can't. The problem is when you're attacking those, it's hard to hit home runs on these pitches that are, outside the zone or put in really, really good locations or, break a certain way. It's hard to do damage on those. So the spike in decision value does like sort of tell us maybe that's where the power came from, just picking his spots a little more. But yeah, so, I'll look at power real quick because that was the real difference. Getting the ball in the air was a big deal for Josh Naylor. Weird, it's kind of erratic here. So, again, the power metric isn't giving us like an answer that I sort of expected, but he was above average with power. I mean, he's really still kind of relying on that hit tool, the fact that he can make a lot of contact. So someone asking, do I look at splits between lefty and righty pitching as well? Absolutely. Right. Like it was a big deal with Josh Lowe. It's a big deal for a lot of lefties. Especially because you just don't get as many chances to see left-handed pitching quite as often. So it's harder to develop against those, especially at the major league level. I'll do it with Tovar just to see if we get anything out of it. Right. So Ezequiel Tovar, this is his power. For him, it's, I know he's got pretty good contact ability. I'm interested in that decision value for Tovar. So that part didn't get better in the second half, and he was better in the second half. So let's see if it was his contact ability that really carried him there. Not really either. So I'm not entirely sure what's behind Tovar's overall change. So maybe I'll dig in a little more. Let's see if there is a difference between left and right-handed. We can do that just by sort of looking at these up here. So what was his decision value against left-handed pitching for Tovar? Ooh, really not good despite being a right-handed hitter. I'm going to go ahead and make a guess. It's because Tovar is really aggressive against left-handed pitching. Yep. There it is. Ezekiel Tovar, incredibly aggressive against right-handed pitching. So that's not ideal. Let's see, what was, he must have been different against right-handed pitching, I would think, but maybe not. Nope. He's just okay. So he's just really aggressive all the time. There it goes. Uh, Tovar, really, really aggressive. And that would mean I'd really like to see if you're that aggressive, right? You have to have plus contact ability. This is not going to cut it in terms of becoming like sort of a next level kind of guy. Let's see if he was better against right or left with right in the middle. And I'm guessing lefties are going to show us just about the same thing. Oh, he was even worse. Ugh. That is not ideal for a right-handed hitter against lefties. He's really aggressive and bad at making contact. So overall, I think Tovar, maybe takes a little bit of the shine off. Again, he's young. He's got a lot of physical talent. It looks like the mental stuff might need a little bit more seasoning, a little bit more learning. The nice thing though is decision value is something players can work on really at any time, right? Like you don't need to face live pitching to necessarily get better decision value. I know there's, I've heard about some cool tech where teams have like goggles guys wear, right? And they see a pitch and they just have to click a button that says, should I have, do I swing or not swing, just from like the release and the pitcher. So it's a very mental thing. They can get better at that. And last thing I'll talk about with our PLV stats, we've got this cool table that Kyle put up here for us. It kind of gives you these 20/80 grades. We've talked a little bit about making these plus grades, like, sort of like WRC plus and things like that. So maybe it's a little more intuitive, but it's really cool to just kind of look at overall how players did, and how either how they were successful or how they weren't, who were the top power guys, who were lower on the spectrum for power. Some will surprise you, some won't, right? Like Joey Gallo still is incredible when he makes contact. He just never does it. Like ever. So, that's how you know the stat works, right? Like when Joey Gallo is exactly the way you expect, it's actually pretty good. And what's funny is like his strike zone judgment is pretty good too. He's good at judging pitches outside the zone. He just can't make contact. He knows when to swing. He knows when not to swing. Joey Gallo, he just doesn't connect.